Hey everybody, welcome to EduMatch. So follow along with us at podcast.edumatch.org/tweet talk. So speaking of EduMatch, as you know that you could be the featured person of the day, sign up on our website at edumatch.org, and then you'll see a big button that says sign up on the top right corner. So when you do this, then you will be added to our awesome table of EduMatch, and people will be able to search for you, find you, add you to their PLN. We'll also tweet about you, all kinds of nice things around the clock for one day. There's a little bit of a wait. I'll be very honest. There's a little bit of a wait for that. But in the meantime, we will tweet out your blog. You'll be added to our awesome table. And in addition, when matches come up, then we will tag you. So tonight we have an amazing topic and an amazing panel. We're going to be talking about the K-16 bridge. In other words, how can pre-K to 12 and higher ed work together? How can we make that connection? So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves, starting first with Amy. Amy, I'm sorry. I think that you're muted. If you could please unmute yourself.
I got muted. Can you hear me now? All right, there we go. Great. I'm Dr. Amy Peach. I'm assistant professor of education technology at Lindenwood University in St. Louis, Missouri. I chair the library media program there, and we just launched an innovation lab that allows our pre-service teachers to try out new technologies and strategies before they actually enter the classroom.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, next we will go to Irene.
Hi, everyone. I'm Irene Bal. I am working at Loyola University, Maryland in the Educational Technology program. I am new at Maryland. I've recently came K-12, where I was an instructional technology coach in South Carolina. And I am K-12, pre-K-12 certified music in both South Carolina and now Maryland. Very excited about that. And I'm happy to be here tonight.
Sweet. Thank you so much for joining us. And last and certainly not least, we have our moderator, Toutoule.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Toutoule Ntoya. I'm here in sunny Southern California, and I'm doing some instructional coaching, working with teachers in makerspaces and integrating makerspaces in the curriculum, and also working with administrators and schools in just rethinking education practices. So our topic today is kind of this K-16 bridge, right? K-12 and higher ed, and how we can kind of work collaboratively. So I'm really excited to be able to talk with Amy and Irene on their thoughts around this topic. So I'm gonna throw this first question out there. What are some impactful collaborative experiences you've had within the K to 16 pipeline? And I'll just throw it out there, whoever wants to answer it first.
Well, I can talk first. So I taught high school for 5 years, my first 5 years teaching, and I was a high school band director, so I worked a lot with the universities around me and in the state in getting students involved in their programs, so kind of bridging the gap from high school to college for my students. But it was a lot of me reaching out to the colleges to get the information, to get my students out there and to get them interested. And so since we were band, I would take them to their high school band days at the colleges so we could go and visit and see, you know, be in the football game and perform. But I realized after my first year that I did a lot of the reach out, but I thought it was very important for my students to have those opportunities.
Awesome.
Well, for me, I've been an educator. I got my background in social studies education, and so I taught history, geography. So social networks is just naturally part of the content. So it came, I think, a little bit easier to me than it did to a lot of other people to reach out. But one of the things that I found really, really important, especially in the St. Louis area, an organization that whose board I chair, Connected Learning, they do basically they offer free professional development for teachers. We found that educators are notorious for being extremely isolated, and so trying to make connections between them, as Sarah does beautifully with EduMatch. But in St. Louis, trying to break down some of these constructs that we have created that, I think a lot of cities do deal with, but St. Louis especially. Maybe you've heard of Ferguson, I don't know, some people haven't heard of it, but there are some issues, between a lot of the different districts, and trying to just be as supportive as possible for every teacher in every school, to ensure that they have access to the resources that they need to be really great teachers. And so Connected Learning started about 3 years ago, and they asked me to chair their board, which turned out to be extremely helpful. I was able to offer some things to them, but for my end, being in higher ed, gave me a really great lens into what's going on in our area schools and what their needs are, and then how we in higher ed can be more supportive of doing that. Traditionally, I think higher ed has always had a very clear way of training our teachers. And I think that that's come under a lot of very, very deserved criticism over the last several years. We need to get them out into the fields more. And so sometimes these organizations that are created that are really designed for K-12 assistants can help, depending on who they ask to be on their boards or who they ask to be on advisory groups. Advisory groups are a really fantastic way to bridge those. And we see those at Lindenwood as well. We have a number of advisory groups where teachers, tech coordinators, librarians, principals all serve to help inform us, much better about what they think new teachers need. So it's been very helpful.
Thank you very much, Amy. That really to the second question that we have. You talked about this advisory board, and you talked about some of the things that you're doing around that work. What are some ways, and maybe we could talk more about the advisory board, or maybe we could talk about other ways that we can work together to form symbiotic relationships between our school districts and our higher education institutions?
There we go. Well, I think that one of the most important things that I've learned about partnerships, at my last institution, I created an education technology experimentation center we basically bought one of everything that we thought could have any relevance in the classroom. Quite often we would buy things off of Kickstarter just to see if maybe they had some application. They hadn't really hit market yet. And that was really very helpful because it gave an open space for us to welcome people into these spaces and say, these are all the different things that we've bought. So before you make a really major purchase, maybe you want to try it out. Maybe you want to bring some of your teachers in. That kind of led into things like advisory boards. So there are a lot of different partnership things that we've done over the years to try to get a better idea of what's actually going on. We're about ready to launch a study that will give us a much clearer idea of, we know anecdotally what people say they're using and what's helpful for them, but we don't have really a lot of solid hard data around that so that we can make really informed decisions. And so that's kind of our next step. But one of the things that I think is extremely important that I've learned in partnering with a number of organizations is that we tend to connect as people. So me, as Amy, I can tell you what, I was a history and government teacher, and I taught ethnic studies, and I did it online, and I did geography, and that relates to you who, you are now teaching that in your classroom, or you're a principal. And we tend to form partnerships around people, and that seems like a very, very good idea. The problem is that people can move in and out of these organizations. And so what we've had to learn is to really, really be clear about what my institution mission is, or what my program mission is, and then what is the mission of the school or the community or whatever other entity in the K-6 or the K-12 world, pre-K-12 world that we're looking at. What are those missions and visions? And we actually have tables to fill out and look at it and say, okay, how closely do these visions and missions align? Because if they really, really don't, this probably isn't a great idea long term. And so trying to make those partnerships sustainable is, I think, the thing that we're really trying to move forward to.
So sustainability, and that's a really important thing, right? We have these partnerships that grow, and partnerships that we produce, but then people move, people get promoted, people do other things, and then that partnership kind of falls by the wayside, and all the good work that was happening kind of disappears. That's a great point. Any other points around this idea of symbiotic relationships?
So here at Loyola, we at Loyola University of Maryland, in our all the graduate programs, we have what we call cohorts of teachers, and we team with the different school districts to create these cohorts. And so I'm in the graduate program, and so these are teachers that are currently teaching. They have to have at least 3 years of teaching under their belt, coming in for educational technology and learning. But the districts, they work with us to create these cohorts, and the students are able, we have them for 2 full years. And through that, we've been able to build a lot of relationships with the local area in Baltimore and all the local school districts. And so we've just created, like Amy was saying, we just created an advisory board for our program so that we can have more input from just general K-12 teachers, as well as students that are currently in our program and ones that have graduated. And of course, teachers that are outside of our program, into what is needed in the area. And even we're trying to expand more into like even DC and like get a little bit larger. But we also, like this past year, we also expanded into hosting events for K-12 teachers. So we hosted an ed camp in which the university funded a portion of it, so we could offer free lunch and we could offer more innovative things within it. And that seemed to really kick off a lot of new relationships that we didn't have previously. And we were able to make, like Amy was saying with Sarah, making more connections with the larger communities, the communities around us.
So advisory boards, you both talked about advisory boards. Can you guys maybe talk a little bit more about, and I don't know, Irene, you kind of touched on this a little bit, who made up the advisory board, and how do you ensure that key stakeholders are a part of that advisory board, and how does the mission, or maybe a common mission or vision, get created in those advisory boards, and what might that look like?
I'm going to let Amy talk about that. I just walked in. I've only been in my position for 3 months. And so the advisory board was put together before I was there. It's only been together for my department for the past year. And there's many communities in it now, and how ours works is we have different goals, and the advisory board works together away from the whole group in smaller committees to get to those goals. And we are kind of like the faculty support. And so if like one group came to me and said, we want to have, similar to like Sarah's doing, these tweet and chats, we want to have some kind of coffee chats in the community. And so we're helping organize and support that based off of what our board brought. But I'm going to let Amy talk about the structure, because I'm sure she has a lot more than I do about that.
No, I think I think Irene brought up an excellent point, that every advisory board process is very, very different. They don't look the same. Even the advisory boards that we have at Lindenwood, there are probably 5 or 6 within the School of Education alone, and they all operate very, very differently. Some of them, they just kind of pool together people that they think would be helpful, that they know, that are already in their network. Others are far more systematic in their processes and how they reach out and how they interact. Some are far more loose about it. For myself, with library media and, in working with the Ed Tech program as well, including, some other programs that are kind of on the horizon here, one of the things that we really, really have to be aware of, it's very, very easy for me to go into my list of Twitter users, or, specific lists that I have, or people that I know that I can think of right off the top of my head and say, oh yeah, that person would be great. But the problem is that just perpetuates the same kind of advice that you're always getting. And we don't want that. We certainly don't want that in St. Louis. We've had way too many isolated silos of education going on. And so for myself and our boards, we've actually created forms that are filled out. These are the people that you want to consider to be on it. Where do they teach? Where do they live? What are their outside experiences? Because we're looking to kind of fly in the face of what I just said about, leaving people out of, the partnership piece and then focusing on the institutions. But for advisory boards, it's absolutely about the person. And so one of the things that we've really discovered is that it's, I can think, oh, yes, Don is, involved in broadcast journalism, and he, works with libraries, and he works with ed tech, and he would be fantastic. I definitely know him. I definitely want, him involved. But I also know that, Jack down the street or Martisha down the street is going to know a whole lot more about this because she's not actually in that field right now. But we do know that this is kind of an interest of hers, that I've watched her Twitter, feed, and she keeps retweeting things that are related to this, even though they're not actually in her job. And so breaking people down, we tend to do this a lot, throughout all industries. We tend to put people in the roles that they occupy. And that by no stretch of the imagination defines this person. And so there could some of the people that are on my advisory committee have nothing whatsoever to do with libraries or education technology, but they are the ones who we're really trying to get involved in that. And so there are lots of different, things to go into that, but really the thing that's most important about advisory boards is if you want to really have that diversity of opinion, that diversity of background, you have to build that into your process. That actually has to be something that you have to go through very, very carefully. The ones that are just kind of thrown together, you wind up with the same kinds of people over and over again. And that's not really what we're looking for with our advisory boards.
One thing
go ahead.
One thing I noticed with our advisory board is ours is voluntary, and the people that volunteer to come and do it have such passion, and they want to have a voice and want to be there, and they want. Our advisory board did a ton of work for the Ed Camp that we hosted, and we all, we said, okay, everyone has to be here around 7, and we had almost every person on that advisory board was there at 7 a.m. like working their tail off all day, and it was really amazing, just the passion, the people that came there, that show up for that, and that's fostering that passion and then making those connections, and like Amy said, putting people that not putting people in jobs that they do normally, but having things that are based on that passion are really important, and something that I'm seeing within our advisory board as I'm learning the process.
So I love this talk about advisory board, and I'd like to talk about that more because this is the first that I'm hearing about these advisory boards and how impactful they are and how we can bring multiple stakeholders together. That's awesome. Our last question now is, how can challenging the best practices in the K-12 world inform teacher prep programs and vice versa?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it has to do, for us anyway, there's a lot of research around what works well for teachers and best practices and things like that. But just telling you from a researcher standpoint, it's not enough. It really doesn't give us a really, really solid idea of what's working and what's not, because as any social scientist will tell you, people are a moving target. And so we can find some research that says, yes, this is a really fantastic practice and you should definitely try this. And then you'll find a study that will directly contradict it. And so it can be, really challenging to find the right thing. And so, for us, what we've spent some time and money and resources on is action research. And for anyone who's not familiar with this, it's really kind of a cross between quality improvement, just basic process improvement in your classroom, and research. You do get some research training in that, but it basically you're just studying a problem that you're seeing in your own classroom, in your own school, and you're applying very specific research methodology to it to really get a solid idea of it. It's not just anecdotal, you're actually pulling data to try to understand what's truly happening. And I'm finishing up. Actually, I've been fielding emails all day from panicked students who have to turn in their projects at the end of the week. And so it's always a struggle for people to learn this process, but it's incredibly shocking and rewarding to them in a lot of ways, because they wind up with answers or nuances to answers that they really, really didn't expect. And so for us, supporting things like that is going to be very, very important, because as I tell them all the time, that we are in a data-driven age. There's a lot of data that it can be extremely, extremely helpful for you to understand it. But realize that that was a study that was conducted during this year with this population, and, in a school that may or may not apply to you. And so it's helpful to take that, all of that research into consideration, and then applying it to your own circumstance and finding out what's actually happening with you and your kids. And that's a completely different question that you're trying to answer. So that's how we try to support it best.
I wanted to go back to the making connections, because Toutoule, I just came from K-12. I'm 3 months out of K-12 at this point, and I was an instructional tech coach before I got into this role. And I worked with a lot of first-year teachers and second-year teachers. And one thing I saw was, if those teachers had a connection and support within their building or even outside of their building, they were a much stronger teacher and much more secure in what they were doing. And so I think those connections are key. I think when we're talking, teacher prep programs, connecting those soon-to-be teachers with current K-12 teachers, and connecting them with schools and connecting them with other educators. I mean, digitally, it doesn't have to be within the area, is very important to ensure to support them and ensure their success. And I think through the research, like Amy was saying, and action research and the connections that they can make, we will create, the teachers that are created will not only be stronger teachers, but they will stay within the programs and stay in teacher education, opposed to leaving like we're seeing now. And what I saw as an instructional tech coach at the district level was a lot of teachers were not supported, and a lot of first-year teachers were just thrown in. And I think, I was a connection for them. I really tried to be, but I couldn't be the only connection. Like Toutoule said, I had multiple schools as well, so you can't be, you can't be it for the teacher. So having them make their own connections and realize that there's support out there, even if they're not receiving it in their building, I think is really big to inform those soon-to-be teachers.
Well, thank you so much for all of your contributions that you've given to us. And the 3 takeaways that I got from our conversation was this idea of advisory boards and bringing people together around some type of common interest and be able to develop something so that we have something that we all can work towards. Another one was connection and support. That's so important, that teachers feel connected and they feel supported in the things that they're going to do. And then the last one was action research. And Sarah tweeted or just left a message on how action research is important and how awesome it is to be able to do some collaborative work and be able to implement something in the classroom, get some data, and then look at what it is we're doing. And if our efforts are giving any fruit, what's happening, just get a gauge for what's happening in the classroom. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Allow me to moderate the conversation. Sarah, I'm throwing it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Toutoule, and thank you so much to Amy and to Irene. Great conversation, great insight tonight, as always. So thank you all so much for bringing that fire and that heat. Also wanted to give a huge shout out to Leslie and to Ron, who were interacting with us on the YouTube live page, as well as everyone who was tweeting along with us. So there were more names there too as well. So my apologies for not calling people out by name, but definitely all of you are appreciated. Thank you for tuning in and for sharing your insight. So just a reminder that we have an opportunity to extend your learning at badgelist.com/edumatch. So just look for tonight's challenge. So you can look under the tags K-16 bridge and you'll see that we have a mile challenge for you. So just share out 3 of your tweets from tonight's episode, or you can catch up during the week and share out your tweets at that point in time. So this will be available as a podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast in the coming weeks. So tune in at the top of the hour where we will be chatting with a panel of educators on their use of Buncee, and we're going to do a deep dive. So definitely check that out. So everyone have a fantastic couple of minutes. Go grab some dinner, or if we see you all later, then have a wonderful evening and rest of your week. So thank you all so much for joining us.